Amen. Want to talk to you today about the character of a Christian. The character of a Christian. Right? We all have characteristics that make us who we are. There are certain things about us that folk can recognize and tell what type of person we are. Can you recognize a Christian when you see one? I hear a lot of folks saying they Christians. Are they? Are you a Christian? Or is it something you say when you're in the right place? And when you're in other places, you don't want nobody to know. What is it that makes a person who they are? Is it something they learn, or is it something that they inherit? If one would ask, what are your characteristics? What is your character? What would you say? Most people say that they're good people, even when they ain't. Because we want to think of people to think of us as being good. Or we can point out everybody else's flaws and they're not this, and we doing the same thing or looking the same way, but we can always see that this so-and-so ain't this, they need to do this. They ought to be here and they ought to be doing. But we don't ever see that we are doing some of the same stuff. And when it's pointed out to us, we got some good excuses. Well, I know I come from a bad. But God understands, He knows my heart. But I believe in our text today, Paul is trying to show us and point out to us what we ought to be as Christians, some characteristics we ought to have as Christians. In the first verse, he says, brothers and sisters, because of God's mercy, I encourage you to present your bodies as a living sacrifice that is holy and pleasing to God. And he said, this is your appropriate priestly service. Basically, Paul is pleading with the people. He's begging the people to give your body to God as a living sacrifice. Live a life that is pleasing to God. And this is the least you can do after all that God has done for you. I hear Paul saying to the people, make a commitment to live by God's will. Make a commitment to do what God would have you to do. Make a sacrifice. Not just one-time sacrifice, but a living sacrifice that is continually being done. Some of us can make some sacrifices on our jobs. We'll do whatever they tell us to do, as long as they keep our paycheck coming. They can say, I want you to work an extra hour. We already worked 13. Okay, Then we realized that they didn't care nothing about us anyway. Some people make commitments to relationships. Some people. Oh, yeah, because some folks be in a relationship, they don't care nothing about their spouse or partner. They do whatever and expect them to be faithful. They'll sacrifice for someone that they really love. They will give their last $2. They'll stay up all night in a hospital room, sacrificing your own personal time for the one that they love. If you say you love God, what kind of sacrifices are you willing to make for God? Are you willing to dedicate your life to Christ, putting Christ above anything else? Sometimes it's easier said than done. Because sometimes Christ puts you in situations where you may have to make a stand, either this job or Christ. Either this person or Christ. And sometimes the choice is hard for some of us to make. Because sometimes we only look at what we can see in front of us without realizing that if I trust God, sometimes I might not see how I'm going to make it, but I trust God. I may have to give up this job that's not a godly job if I'm going to put my trust in God. But what I've learned is sometimes you can give up things and God has something else waiting on you. Sometimes we find ourselves being miserable because we think we got to hold on to stuff, and we finally let go and God got something better for us. When you think about all the things that God has done for you, the many times when you were in places where you shouldn't have been, but God made a way to get you out. Paul is saying, after all that God has done, the least we can do is just give God ourselves. Become a living sacrifice. Do the things that are pleasing to God. Some of us try to please folk who don't care nothing about us. Pleasing them, all they're doing is hurting us. Every night we're crying, oh this and oh that. But if we let go and let God have it, give God that kind of commitment that you're willing to trust him no matter what's going on in your life. The second thing I see in our text, he says to them, don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you can find out what God's will is for you. He's pleading to the people at the church in Rome that don't be caught up in what's going on in the world around you. Don't conform yourself to the world's way of life, but be transformed. And that comes by having a renewed mind. Sometimes we can get caught up in what everybody else is doing, and everybody else is doing leads us in the wrong direction. There are many folk who got in trouble trying to do what everybody else was doing. And then they found out you can't do what everybody else is doing. We get caught up in trying to get along just to fit in. Even we know we feel uncomfortable, but we're doing it anyway because that's what everybody else is doing. We get caught up in the world's way, caught up in falling for what the world is falling for, and the world is going to, they say, something in the handbag. It's falling apart. The world is coming into a chair where people don't care about nobody but themselves. And we can't get caught up in that to where we're only concerned about ourselves and we do whatever we can to please ourselves, even if it hurt the people we claim that we love. He said, you got to be different from the world. You have to be transformed. Transform your way of thinking. Transform your attitude. Transform the thing that is important to you. The world says everything ought to be about money and what you can get and how much you have. And so we get caught up chasing the money and we realize that we never can have enough. And we miss out on loving one another. Miss out on being concerned about one another and compassionate about a wonder. Because one day your money can't help you. When you land on your sick bed, your money can't do nothing for you. When you land on your deathbed, your money can't help you. And you missed out on the most important things in life. We have to change our attitude. Sometimes we go through life miserable because we only see the negative things in life. But if we transform our attitude, no matter how bad your day is going, you can find something good in it. Well, the Lord woke me up this morning. I'm all right. I may not have the big fancy car, I may not have a big house, but I got love at my dinner table. I got folks who are concerned about me. I got folks who love me. That's more important than some of these material things. Well, understand that even though things happen in your life, they may seem bad right now. But sometimes bad things are not always as bad as they seem. They're just molding and shaping you so that you be able to accept the good things that God has for you. They say things have to go through the fire. And the fire burns off all the impurities. The fire burns off all the things that you're going to need. And then when you come out, you're shining like a bright gold nugget. I've learned that I just got to trust that God knows what God is doing, even when it don't make sense to me. And you know what? He's never proved me wrong. Some of the things I thought were bad that I was going through. You lose your job, you lose this. But then God takes care of you with something better. We must truly trust in the Lord and lean not to our own understandings. And he goes on, he says here, because of the grace God has given me, I can say to each one, you don't think of yourself more highly than you ought to think. In other words, what he's saying, you have to stay humble. Many people have a hard time being humble in our world today. I know some folks who got to be right all the time. Even when they're wrong, they got to be right. They go around bragging about all the things they got. I got this and I got that. I got this. I'm this and I'm that. Some folks even lie to try to impress us about who they are and what they got. As if they don't realize that folks can see right through them. They may not say it to your face, but they sort of say it behind your back. She must think we dumb or something. And then you have folks who complain about everything. No matter what people are doing, they can find fault in it. But that was nice, but you could have. You would have done that. Complain. That's all they do. Like nothing anybody does is right. Only what they do. I hear you. The choir, they didn't sound. They was off tune. The preacher preached too long. But Paul has said, no, don't think of yourself more important than you ought to. Humble yourself. Because no matter what you have done, no matter what you have accomplished, there's always something bigger and better. It ought not be about you anyway. It ought to be God. What am I doing for God? What am I doing to build up God? If they never call my name, if they never recognize me, that's all right. I used to say years ago, only what you do for Christ will last. Jesus said, don't be so high-minded, but humble yourself. And then he goes on, he says, let me see here, verse 6, verse 5, in the verse 4, we have many parts in one body, but all parts don't have the same function. In the same way, though there are many of us, we are one body in Christ. Individually, we belong to one another. We all need each other. That's why you got to stay humble. You're no better than nobody else. All of us need each other. The strong should help those who are weak. The weak help those who are strong. All of us can bring our differences and come together to make the whole be strong. I may be good at one thing, and you may be good at something else, but we bring it all together, then we're real strong as we come together. Someone once said we can do it better together. So what Paul was saying to them, that all of us come together, we are all important in God's sight. I can't look down on somebody else saying I'm better than them because I was in a position where God blessed me to get a better job than them. But that don't make me better than him. God just happened to show favor on me. He could have gave it to somebody else. So I ought to be willing to work together with one another. Whatever you're good at, you bring it. If you can cook, bring your food. If you can clean, bring your cleaning materials. Whatever you can do, bring it together, and we use it to build up God's kingdom. He said, it's all come because of God's grace. Whatever gift you have, whatever talent you have it because of God's grace. You didn't ask for it. God just gave it to you. He just said, oh, you're going to be a good singer. You're going to be a good leader. You're going to be a good preacher. You're going to be a good, whatever you can do. God gave it to you. And he goes on to say, well, each one of us ought to use that gift that God has given to us to build up God's kingdom. Give. With no strings attached. Give. Whatever you can do, do it. Don't be worried about how many folks it is. Well, it ain't enough folk for me to sing, so I ain't going to sing today. The right person ain't here, so I'm not going to do anything today. But he said all of us got to use whatever God has given to you. Use it to build up God's kingdom. If you can prophesy, prophesy. If you can serve, serve. If you can teach, teach. Whatever it is you can do, do it for God to get the glory. All of us has a calling on our life. All of us can do something. You may not think it's important, but don't worry about that. You may say worried about folks don't think that this is an important job. Oh, yes. But every job is important. There's a story about a man named Michael. He was a faithful member of his church for years. But he wasn't one of those boastful folks. He was a quiet man. He did not hold a position in church leadership. He was not yet 60, so his sudden death after a short illness shocked the membership of his church. In the weeks that followed his death, the congregation seemed a bit ragged around the edges. Things just wasn't getting done. People would arrive at church and realize that there was no coffee made. The ushers would reach for an offering plate and notice they were not there. Small thing after small thing fell through the cracks. And the reason was because Michael had always done it. You see, there's something all of us can do. It may not seem important. People may not even notice it till after you're gone. But it doesn't matter. It is important. It is needed. And when it's not done, the church suffers. No matter how small is needed to make up the body. You don't have to wait for somebody to ask you to do. Just start volunteering to do things on your own as God places in your heart. Perhaps nobody knows because God placed it in your heart for you to do. Don't worry if the right person doesn't recognize what you've done. That's all right because God knows. We all are here to serve God using the gift that God has given us. It doesn't mean that one person can try to do everything. They do have some folks who try to do everything. But get where God has placed you. Don't be so busy trying to do everybody else's job. But allow others to do and use the gift that God has given them. God placed all of us here in this world for a reason. We got to find out what it is and do. Some of us may be passionate about children and wonder why don't nobody else cares. Perhaps God is calling you to work with children. Some may be passionate about outreach ministries and want to help people who are in need. Don't be frustrated because no one else wants to do anything. Perhaps God has called you to do it. He said, whatever your gift is, do it. If it's prophecy, prophesy. If it's service, devote yourself to serving. If it's teaching, devote yourself to teaching. If it's just encouraging, and some of us need to be encouraged, and some folks have some good encouraging words all the time. If you're just a leader, do so with passion. And if you're just good at showing mercy, do that in a cheerful way. Whatever it is that God has called you to do it. Is needed. Is needed. Everybody is important. Nobody has the right to say we have no need of you because this world doesn't belong to you. It belongs to God. You see, this text today is talking to us about the characteristics that we should have as Christians. We should humble ourselves, setting ourselves apart, giving ourselves to God. We should have a new mindset that's different from the world because our minds have been transformed. And we know that we're here to love. We recognize that we must stay humble because God is the one who gives us what we have. We recognize that our gifts are important and we must use it to serve God's kingdom. These are the characteristics of a Christian. Do you have them? If not, you might have to check yourself to see if you're really a Christian. God bless you and God keep you.